Okay, you haven't seen me, you haven't heard from me in a little bit, and it's been by design, unfortunately. I only do this when I have free time. And then on top of it, there's been some other issues that, just has sort of put me in this position to where it's very difficult to answer questions right now when it comes to special education law. Now, why is that? Well, because of the very nature and makeup of government, guys. And especially when it comes to special education law, 504, things of that nature, it is very dependent upon a willingness of the school system or the government school to play along, to recognize the venue, to recognize the need to participate. Okay. So this is a mechanism, obviously, for corrective action and a venue for the parent to advocate on behalf of their child. Okay. At the same time, you have a government entity in the form of the government school that receives funding. So as part of the rules, I guess, for them accepting the funding, they have to follow these civil rights acts in the form of 504, which of course doesn't come with funding, but they're still required to follow the rules. And then you have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, to where it does come with some funding. And as a result, the schools are beholden to providing your child with a free, appropriate public education. And the consequence for not doing so is those mechanisms of dispute resolution in the form of due process, mediation, facilitated IEP meetings, state complaints. See, those are all mechanisms of corrective action if the school is not complying with the terms attached to the funding. And even without the funding, no, it's still fundamentally at the base level a civil rights act. But at the same time, it requires um, an acknowledgement from the government school that they're going to play by the rules. Well, what happens when they don't want to play by the rules anymore? And we're running into that problem. But I sort of warned everybody, if anybody's been around long enough to pay attention to, we were already having a problem with that. I mean, of course, I'm not delusional, guys. I understand that I only deal with problems. So the system does work on a level far more than it doesn't work just by the sheer numbers and the stats. Okay, but at the same time, where it doesn't work, that's where I have more of a daily perspective because that's exactly what we deal with. Now, at the same time, COVID, when it hit this past March, really threw everything into a tailspin because at that point, the traditional method of delivery didn't really exist for a time period. And so with that, then you had the CARES Act, Congress saying that there wasn't, well, the Department of Education saying that there wasn't going to be any waivers provided with regards to the requirement to provide a free, appropriate public education. Then we moved into the summer. Then we had the unknown of how fall would start for the 2021 school year. I did a lot of videos about that, trying to anticipate. And guys, I can tell you that what used to be, with regards to our regulations, with regards to the law, if you look at it like an element, you would describe it as ice, as a solid. Okay, and when things are like a solid, all right, then it's a little bit more predictable with regards to how you would approach it because everybody acknowledges it's a solid. Now, what COVID did is it sort of melted the ice, guys. And now I have an element that sometimes it's a solid, sometimes it's a gas, sometimes it's a liquid. And that is the worst possible environment that you can find yourself in when it comes to the law. because who gets to decide if it's a solid or a gas or a liquid? Well, the government. So if the government is making these determinations on what form it wants to take, then we're also reliant within this system and structure of government, and especially within the law, there needs to be sort of a constant for us to sit there and base determinations on, especially if you avail yourselves to a forum or to a tribunal in the form of, let's say, a hearing officer or administrative law judge or a federal judge. So you avail yourself to these tribunals and you say, this is what the problem is. This is what is not being followed. And then at the same time, you have the government coming in and saying, well, we can't follow it. We're not going to follow it. We're shut down. And not that any of these excuses, because I've said this before, outside of a governor's order shutting things down, shutting you down, which happened to all of us back in March. But outside of that, many of the decisions to cancel school or move back to a virtual or stay in a virtual or not open up for in-person services at all, this has been very inconsistent, and it's just been an array of issues to the point where there hasn't been predictability, there hasn't been consistency in many of the locations across the country, to the point where an IEP, which is a fluid document, but only fluid to the point of this IEP meeting to this IEP meeting. Any period of time between these two IEP meetings, that is that's a legal document, guys. Now, it can constantly be changed through the course of the school year, but at the same time, let's say it's not changed. Let's say that, but then within these 2 points, the situation within your school has changed 4 times. It ends up having an aggregate negative on the child's program, the child's ability to receive a free, appropriate public education. There's also a lot of lying going on, a lot of deceptions, to where, people sit there and go, oh, well, they're doing great virtually. When the child is not a virtual learner, they know damn well that the child's not a virtual learner. They know that a certain segment of their student population isn't even logging on and participating this school year. I also have a few teacher clients of mine, I'm not going to tell you in which state, that have been given instructions not to give any kid with an IEP a grade less than a C, whether they have logged on and participated or not. That is just across the board what they're directed by their administration to hand out. Now, do they feel comfortable doing that? No, not at all. But at the same time, they like being employed. And so these are the kind of systemic decisions being made in order to try to safeguard the system. And we're seeing a lot of damage being done to all student populations, and not just our vulnerable populations and those requiring accommodations through 504s or specialized instruction in the form of their IEP. So these are the problems that we're dealing with, is that I don't have a solid anymore. I have a gas that I'm dealing with. I'm having a liquid that I'm dealing with, to the point where the mechanism itself is reliant upon our normal rules, that this is a solid. These are the rules. This is what you must follow. And because it's no longer a solid, and that there's just no predictability, there's no accountability, quite frankly, until things normalize. And it doesn't mean that we're not busy, and it doesn't mean that there isn't corrective action and there isn't ways to fix things. But the problem is that even with the agreements that we've had over this past year almost, of uncertainty, they still are susceptible of not being followed or complied with by the government school because of this very selective attitude of we're a gas right now, we're a liquid right now. Can't do anything about it. And my thing is, there is no governor order that is preventing you from providing in-person services. Well, yeah, but our union made a negotiated deal with the Board of Education to where the union and the Board of Education has agreed that there will be no in-person services. Okay, that has nothing to, I mean, they can sit there and blame it on COVID and say that that's the catalyst behind why they won't provide in-person services, but it wasn't the governor's order preventing the school from being able to do that, which means that it then falls back on the Board of Education for making that determination, which then impedes the child's ability to receive a FAPE. And it's impacting, in a particular state, it's impacting all students. And they just will not provide services, in-person services, period, and haven't done so since last March. So that is what I'm dealing with. And it becomes extremely frustrating because, I sit there and I go, well, I'm going to answer questions, parent questions, based upon a solid. And then the parent takes that information and it's all correct information, guys. But then you take that information and the school goes, well, we're a gas right now. It doesn't mean that their legal responsibility to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education has changed. It's still there. But the problem is that they're a gas right now. They're a liquid right now. Not much we can do. When in reality, it's based upon the falsehood that the virus is somehow making these decisions for the government, and that's just not the case. There are very, very few state governor's orders that are truly impeding a school's ability to provide in-person services. Very, very, very few. The mass majority, these decisions are being made locally by the Board of Education or by the influence of the union, who is there to advocate on behalf of their membership, which are the teachers. And that is not in line with advocating for the students, all right? A union's job is not for pro-students. They're not pro-student. They're pro-teacher. That's a union to protect the membership, which is teachers, not students. So never be surprised when the union makes decisions for its memberships, and even advantageous, meaning, hey, you get to stay home and, not, and I don't want hate stuff, guys. You get what I'm saying. All right. Don't sit there and go, oh, we're not sitting at home. Yeah, some of you are sitting at home. And I'm not saying that you think that this is all fine and dandy as with regards to, having to teach virtually, because I just don't know how much of that's going on. And I think that we've done this long enough to sort of realize that it's a disaster, in large part. All right. Not saying that there's not pockets of happiness and gumdrops and unicorns. All right. But on the whole, it's been a disaster. And I can show you the statistics to back that up. It's been disastrous to my clients caught in this web. Okay. So when it comes to that, at the end of the day, what do you do about it? And I don't want to provide misinformation. Well, I'm never providing misinformation, but what I'm saying is that providing the information to where it would be absolutely applicable to where you would sit in confidence. And my thing is, you can still do that, but just understand that you're arguing solid to an entity that says I'm gas. And that's where it gets extremely frustrating and it gets extremely complex because, like I said, This is a process that relies upon the government school agreeing to play by the rules. And when it decides it's not going to, and then provides itself with a million different excuses of COVID. I can't do it because of COVID. And many of us have been brainwashed into believing that excuse. Well, I mean, it's COVID. I have to wear a mask everywhere. That must be real. And my thing is that the law doesn't work like that. So it just is what it is, guys. It's a solid. And we need it to stay a solid. I don't need it to be a gas. Otherwise, we have no law, guys. Otherwise, we have no country. We have no civilization, because we have to have these rules, and they have to be like this. And then there has to be an acknowledgement by the side being held accountable, meaning the government side, that they're going to play by those rules. Whether those are well-intentioned excuses or not, I don't need it being fluid. I need it being objective truth. I need it to be solid in its acknowledgement. And many of you have adopted this idea of just fluid truth, and that I'm going to tell my truth, and I'm going to, it's just nonsense, guys. Dangerous path to go down, to sit there and say my truth. And no, there's just truth, guys. It's just an objective truth. There needs to be fact and there needs to be truth. And that's a solid, and we all must agree upon those things. Because we have to have people like a judge or a hearing officer or a jury sit in judgment of those things based upon this solid. But when that's just nothing, it's whatever somebody thinks it is. And it doesn't work if it's an individual and I go, well, that's just not my truth. Well, you see, when the government comes in and it wants to arrest you and it wants to charge you, then it's charging you based upon you being a solid. You can sit there and pretend you're a gas or a liquid, whatever. Doesn't matter. Government has the power, and the government's going to treat you like a solid. And they're going to make a decision based upon that. But what happens when you as an individual are saying these are the rules, but then the government is the one that decides that it wants to be a gas or a liquid? Then how do you ever hold it accountable? How do you ever catch it by its tail? That's the problem we have right now. At the end of the day, though, do I think it will normalize? Yes, I do absolutely believe it will normalize. And then you have your statute of limitations to hold it accountable. In retrospect, okay? And in most places, that's a 2-year statute of limitations, except in North Carolina and Texas, and that's 1 year. So you got to sit there and get a move on if you want to hold your district accountable with regards to a free and appropriate public education. Now, pay close attention to what I'm about to say. They didn't get waivers in May, like some of the school systems were really pushing for and hoping for with regards to the Department of Education. All right, but this has continued. This nonsense has continued well past May, to the point where you're talking about almost an entire school year now. And we're getting close, and we will surpass a full calendar year of a lack of appropriate services for your child, to the point where no waivers exist, and therefore the schools are held to account with regards to compensatory services owed to your child for them not following the rules and the law. Okay, and you go, well, that's a good thing, right? Yes, it is, if you do something about it in the form of triggering a dispute resolution process to secure those things for your child. Because what do I think very well could happen over the next few months? And it would have to start in January. So let's say that the Biden administration ends up actually, being the next administration. I'm one of those people that I understand the Constitution, and there's things that are still up in the air. But let's say that that becomes the Biden administration in January. And they're currently trying to discuss another emergency bill, all right, that will include education. What do I think is going to likely be the outcome because of how long this has gone on? They were fighting for waivers in May, guys, and this is the education system. The government education system was fighting for waivers in May. COVID had just gone this 3 months, guys, and they were asking for waivers. What the hell do you think that they're going to be pushing a new Biden administration if they end up if that ends up happening? What do you think they're going to be pushing for now that this has gone on almost a calendar year? Do you think that they're somehow not going to be pushing for waivers? And do I think that they have a high likelihood under a Biden administration of securing waivers? I think they have a much better chance of securing waivers for the public education system under a Biden administration. Because of politics, guys. Who is traditionally a supporter of the Democrat candidate? And do I think that they're probably going to lean toward some kind of waiver in order to safeguard the schools from liability? And I'm talking about compensatory services. I'm not talking about money damages. I'm talking about compensatory services, services owed to your child due to the inability, or what they're going to claim, their inability to provide your child with a free, appropriate public education. That's what I think is going to go down. I could be wrong, and absolutely. And if so, I'm very happy that I would be wrong. But at the same time, I know what makes a cage bird sing, and I'm not an idiot, and I don't like either party. And I understand the nature of humans, and that's going to be what's going to be the driving force. Is we need to protect the entity. We need to protect the schools because they've been a gas and they've been a liquid. And, you know, we can't have them be a solid right now, because if they're a solid, then, you know, all these parents are going to hold them accountable, and all these parents are going to want compensatory services for their students. Instead of the schools being a solid this whole time, like they should have been, they're going to sit there and say, but we were a gas and we were a liquid and we couldn't do all these things. You could have done a whole bunch more than what you've done. You could have. Very few limitations. But it's just easier to be a gas when you want to be a gas, and a liquid when you want to be a liquid. It's hard being a solid, guys. It's hard being a solid. And like I said, I've been extremely busy when we've been in solid land. Okay? Because prior to March, we were always in solid land. This is the law. Solid land. All right. And so I still had a bunch of cases because we were in solid land, and the schools still, pockets of schools just didn't care. Pockets of administrators didn't care. But see, now we're COVID, so they get to be whatever they want to be because they're in positions of authority, and they get to make these decisions based upon more of convenience than anything else, kicking the can of legal responsibility way down the road, and then hoping that they can advocate for themselves, not for your child, to protect them as an entity, because they were a gas and they were a liquid. And we need to understand that and have patience, even though they all got paid during this period. See, they didn't want to be a gas or a liquid when it comes to their paycheck. Can you imagine if the government just said, well, we decided to be a gas this time and just not pay you? No, see, that's where the union comes in and says, no, you're a solid government. You have a responsibility to our membership to pay them and take care of them and give them retirement benefits and health benefits, you know. But then when it comes to the responsibilities that's attached to that money, that's what's been very frustrating to me. And so therefore it's taken me a little bit of time. Also, I haven't had a lot of time, but then the frustrating aspect is how do I answer questions when the other half of this that relies upon an acknowledgement of participation in the process decides that it doesn't want to be a solid? And that's the frustrating aspect.